Okay, it's wonderful to see all of you. I have a few treats lined up today. First of all, just so you can find the place, we are all the way at the top of Testament Base, all the way at the top of 9b, and we're going to be talking about the sugya of a sukkah tachas ilan, when you build a sukkah under a tree, and sukkah tachas sukkah, when you build one sukkah under another sukkah. And so I have one sefer on top of another sefer on top of another sefer, Baruch Hashem, right over here, Rashal Veichik, Rabbi Yashiv, and Rashal Zalman Orbach, all revolving around a very important question we're going to be dealing with today. When we go into the Ian section, we're going to talk about a concept which I'm sure many of you have heard of called Bittul Barov, which is something being nullified in the majority. And I know for those who are with us at the 6:30 chakras or follow the Pnei Halacha, this will be extra special because it's going to actually tie into what we've been doing in our daily morning halachas. Okay, so this is a kind of Gemara that there is so many levels to it within Rishonim, just how to understand Pashat Pshat, just to get the basic understanding of the Gemara. So we're going to stick to Rashi for the most part. Just understanding Rashi is like kind of Dayenu a little bit on this, but we will delve deeper, don't worry. Okay, so here we go. All the way at the top of 9b of Testament Base. If you build a sukkah under a tree, it's just as bad as if you decide to build it under the roof of your house. Sukkah al gabi sukkah helyona kashir p'tachtona psula. You build one sukkah on top of another sukkah. The sukkah on top is going to be kosher. The one on bottom will be pasul. We'll get more into the details in the Gemara, of course, but just on a basic level, the bottom sukkah is being obstructed by the top sukkah. But the top sukkah, as long as it's within 20 amos, the schachar within 20 amos, it would be kosher. Yehuda Omer, that if there's no one dwelling in the upper sukkah, the bottom sukkah will be kosher. And again, we'll get to Rabbi Yehuda's shita, God willing, next week. Okay. Amar
Rabbi, how could that be? Just because the upper sukkah is empty, what about the schach for the lower sukkah?
So I'll share with you a very beautiful Rashi, all the way at the end of the Mishnah. You know, it says on Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, the Gemara Mefarishla. The Gemara will explain it in good time.
Okay.
Sorry to do that to you, but Rashi, that's Rashi.
Sorry.
Rashi knew that someone like you fellows would be so bothered by it that he had to put that in over there. But no, Rashi had to write that because he knew that there was probably something bugging us in the back of our minds. So that was for you, Phyllis. Okay, Rashi wrote that for you. Okay, so the Gemara begins as follows: Amarava lo shanu ela be'ilan shetzilasa meruba mechamaso. This issue of a tree being hanging over the schach of your sukkah is if the tree provides more shade than lack thereof. But if the shade is so flimsy, it's mostly sun coming through, then we would not have to worry about it. Why? Because we could derive this from the formulation of the Mishnah. The Mishnah said that building a sukkah under a tree is like building in a house. Why did the Mishnah have to make an analogy to building it under the roof of a house? Just say if you build a sukkah under a tree, it's pasul. You don't need to start giving me analogies to other cases. Ella hakamash malan the ilan dumi debayis. Rather, the Mishnah was specifically trying to compare the parameters of a house to a tree. How so? Just like if you build a sukkah under a roof of a house, it's only when the roof of the house is mostly intact would there be an issue. Likewise, for a tree as well, it's only when when there's majority shade being provided by that tree would it be an issue? And there's already going to be a little bit of discussion in the Gemara, and not in the Rishonim, is what's happening over here is that the schach, actually, let me read a few more lines before I elaborate on that. So the Gemara asked, my hobby. So why should we care? Why should it make a difference if the tree's shade it's giving less than 50? I'm sorry, I left my WhatsApp open. That's why I keep hearing dinging in the background. Let me just close that in the background. So just give me a moment. There we go. Okay. That way all the WhatsApps you won't hear. Okay. All right. You still hear me, guys? Okay, very good. So the Gemara is asking, my hobby. How come it's kosher? It doesn't matter even if the shade being provided by the tree is less than 50% shade. Nonetheless, it's going to combine with the schach below and invalidate it. Now, there's two ways to understand what the issue is. Rashi says the issue is the issue is that the schach below also, you don't have a sufficient amount of schach. So between your insufficient amount of schach and the branches and the leaves from the tree, you'll have silasa meruba mechamasa. You'll have enough. However, some understand that the issue exists even if the shade provided inherently by your schach is silasa mechamasa, is enough. The issue is that some of the shade provided by the tree is going to nullify the schach that is directly under it and render it chamasa meruba mitzilasa. It'll render it as if it is not considered to have a majority of shade, because the majority of shade is not coming from the schach, since some of it is being provided by the tree. Those are two ways to understand it. We'll just stick with Rashi. Rashi says the issue is that slahashlim tzilusa shel sukkah, that the schach on its own is insufficient and it's combining with the shade of the tree in order to be mashlim it. So, right, so now back, so what was our question? We'll just read it back in again. Why is that? Why should this hinge on whether the shade from the tree is 51% or 49%? Who cares? If it's combining with the schach to make a kosher sukkah, well, I got news for you. That's not called a kosher sukkah, because even though the branches are eligible to become kosher schach, so long as they remain mechubar lekarka, they're attached to the ground, they are invalid schach. So Amar Rav Papa says, so what's going on over here? When does it make a difference? B'shechaftan. Now, what's b'shechaftan mean? I told you, like every step of the Gemara, just like different opinions. We're going to just stick with Rashi, and Rashi is quite an opinion. What does Rashi say? If you look at Dibur Maskal b'shechaftan, he says, Hishbil anaf of lamata, mu'urvin im schach kosher. So what you're doing is you're taking the branches, and instead of leaving the branches suspended a few feet over the sukkah, you're actually bending the branches down, mixing it together with the schach, so it becomes ambiguous. It's all mixed together. The ein nira ba'ayin uschach kosher rabolav, and since there is a more kosher schach than non-kosher schach, umevatlo, it's going to be able to nullify the non-kosher schach and assimilate it into the kosher schach. The midaraisa kol mili batul beruba, because we have a major cloud that of batul berov, that a minority problematic ingredient can become batel in the majority okay ingredients, right? In kashrus we have that. So too over here as well. Now there's a huge issue with comparing this to the laws of kashrus. I'll raise the question for you right now. We'll try to resolve it afterwards. In the Minchas Shlomo, I mean, I think it's raised earlier in the Ran as well, but I'll just read you what he says. In the Minchas Shlomo, Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, he raises that the Ein Zeka Kol Bittul Barov Shel Torah, This is not like your standard bittul barov in the Torah. Can anyone tell me why this seems different than your average case of bittul barov in halacha, of nullifying in a majority? Can anyone identify what might be an issue or two over here?
Is it one intentional versus accidental?
Excellent point. So a judge said is that we have a principle of ema vatlin iser lecharchila. They're not allowed to deliberately try to nullify something. The Rabbanan said you're not allowed to deliberately try to nullify something. Now, I didn't say anyone who said this, but I was wondering. The phrase is ema vatlin iser lecharchila. You're not allowed to take something that's usher, that's prohibited, and mix it in, right? So take something that's treif, and you try to mix it together. That's an issue. So I guess the question is, here we're not dealing with iser v'heter. Here we're dealing with something's kosher or puzzle, not non-kosher. It's puzzle. It's not usher. It's just not. It doesn't.
On a class. I'm on a class. Okay.
So maybe imaval and isra chachila would not apply. Can we identify the second issue over here? The second issue is that va'od de ba'alma heicha she'efshel levar is iser eno batel. V'hacha hari yichol levarer. In halacha, what makes something a suffix? A suffix is something that you can't figure out the answer to. When it's efshel levarer, if all you have to do is just investigate the matter and you could resolve your doubt, that's not really a doubt. So what do you have to do? All you have to do is go to the sukkah, start. It's kind of like, when you have wires that are mixed up with each other, so you don't know, which cord goes to which plug. So you follow the crumbs, right? You follow the paper trail. I'm using a lot of different analogies here. And you figure out what connects to what. So all you have to do basically is just get up on a ladder, follow the branches, and see which ones lead back to the tree and which ones don't. Just, I didn't bring my picture book with me, but you can imagine what it looks like, right? You bend the tree down, the branches down into the sukkah. So the second issue here is that, in general, if it's efshel levarer, and you can figure out what is problematic and what's not, that's not called a suffix, and you shouldn't be using bittul barov. Bittul barov won't work when bittul barov works when things get mixed up and you don't there's nothing else you can do about it. So those are the two issues that Rosh Talmud Auerbach raises, as well as a lot of folks raise that. So keep that question in the back of your mind, and God willing, we'll circle back there and try to offer some answers to Rashi. Anyway, coming back to the Gemara. So in the Gemara, we left off. Okay, let's circle back, right? So let's just start with the Chichamasaru Mitzilaso, just to reorient ourselves. So we said, Chichamasaru Mitzilaso Maihavi, Hakam Mitztar Schach Pasal Badi Schach Kasher. So why should it make a difference if if the leaves of the tree are insufficient? Still, the leaves of the tree are what's combining with the schach to make it kosher. So, combining with it, so it should be puzzle still. So, based on Rashi's understanding, you are mixing the minority of non-kosher schach with kosher schach, and that's how we make it kosher. But then the Gemara asks, then the Gemara asks, if that's true, what's the chiddush? That's another question on Rashi, because the Gemara is saying, if that's true, that you can just mix everything together, isn't that so obvious? What's the chiddush over here? Well, if you accept Rashi's understanding the Gemara, it's a pretty big chiddush, actually, that you could mix puzzle skach with kosher skach like that deliberately and make it valid for the skach. So, Madatema, what would have been my havamina? Nigzor hechet de chaftan, atu hechet de lo chaftan. Kamash malan de lo gazrinan. What would my havamina have been? I would have thought the rabbis would have made a general low plug. They would have made a rule across the board that because we're concerned that you might rely on the shade of a tree when it's suspended over the schach, we're going to prohibit you from combining it directly with the schach. Kamash Malan, that's the chiddush over here, that the rabbis, they gave us a little bit of leeway. They were very gracious, and they said you're still allowed to mix the non-kosher schach from the tree with the kosher schach in order to make it valid. Okay. So now the issue is we accept this point. But the issue at this point, at this juncture of the Gemara, is that why did I need to derive this from our Mishnah? We're going to get to, God willing, Daf Yud Aleph very soon. I would hope, right? If we keep our schedule in a few weeks, we should get to Yud Aleph very soon, God willing. Hanami Tanina, and in the Mishnah over there, it says, Hideles Gefen Vesadlas Vesakisos. If you take vines, grapevines, gourd, or kisos, Rashi describes kisos as an asef, a mispashi ma'od. It's some kind of grass that spreads out a lot. Usharshav ki'ilan, its roots are like a tree. The karo ki'ilan, the kornlo idra, which semach tapes. Oh, so it's some sort of okay, fine. So mispashi ba'ula alachomas, and it goes up the walls. So I looked it up just to make sure I understood what Rashi was talking about. Apparently, it's ivy. That's how Rabbi Arthur Scroll understood it, I believe, right? Yes. Okay. So it seemed Rashi is describing ivy from his description. Okay. So it says in the Mishnah over there, Usichik al gaba and psula. If you use all these different vines, that will be a puzzle sukkah. But or oshek satzan. But if there was a lot more legitimate schach than these vines that are attached to the ground, or you detached these vines from the ground, rendering them kosher, then you have a kosher sukkah. So Dani. So what is this Mishnah describing? If the Mishnah is describing that it's okay to mix suspended branches and vines that are attached to the ground, even though they're suspended, well, that's an issue then, because we hold that's possible. Rather, the Mishnah is teaching me that when you combine the non-kosher, the attached vines with the detached vines that are on your sukkah, it's kosher. Ushmamina to lo gazrinan. And the chiddush is that we do not make a low plug, that we permit you to mix them together. So the issue is that if I can infer that from a Mishnah coming up soon on Yud Aleph, what do I need our Mishnah here to teach me that? We have a superfluity, if that's a word. And so why do I need both Mishnahs to teach me the same thing? So what's so special about about what we're inferring from our Mishnah? What does our Mishnah come to add? Ma detema hani mili b'di'evet, avachachila lo kamash malan. If you look at the formulation of the Mishnah Yud Aleph, it makes it sound like b'di'evet, post facto. If you happen to do it, then you can make things work. The formulation of our Mishnah is that instructing us how to make a kosher sukkah lichatchila, from the onset or outset. I always forget which one. So therefore, our Mishnah is teaching us something we would not have known otherwise, which is even lichatchila. You're allowed to construct the sukkah in such a manner in which you mix some of the branches with the majority kosher schach, and then it assimilates it in, and it becomes 100% kosher, and you have a legitimate sukkah. Okay, deep breath. That was the most complicated part of the night, I do believe. Judd, you have a question?
I have a question. It's going to sound kind of silly. Suppose your walls are full of ivy. And that ivy potentially could reach the stuff over the course of Yom Tov.
So the ivy's attached to the ground, right?
Right.
It's going to grow over the course of Yom Tov very fast, and it's going to go over your schach.
Or crawl up the walls on the inside.
Yeah. So this sounds a lot. Well, the walls don't matter, right? Because the walls can be made out of anything. So the ivy's not going to render the walls problematic. But it would sound like if the ivy crawls on top of your schach, as long as you still have majority shade from your schach, I would think there wouldn't be a problem. Now, what if it covers your entire schach magically? Then that's quite a case. Maybe it would be an issue then. It would also be interesting to discuss, if you remember we had that sugya, what was it? It was Daf Daled, was it? It was forgetting where precisely. No, it was Daf Daled Av. So Daf Daled, we talked about being mevat. Remember, we wanted to raise the floor level by putting different things on the ground. So you have to intentionally be mevatlet. So it'd be interesting. I didn't look into this, but I'm sure some have to discuss this. To what degree do you have to deliberately, according to Rashi, to deliberately with kavana choose to be mevatelet? It can't just incidentally join together. Maybe according to Rashi, needs to be some kavana to it as well. It's that just occurred to me right now. So it's a good point, Judd. But I think those would be the general rules, the general klalim. All right. Okay, so back to the Gemara, both sides. Back to the Gemara. The Gemara says, so until now we've been talking about a sukkah tachas ilan, a sukkah that was under a tree. What about a sukkah under a sukkah? And right, we'll get to, I'm sure at some point later on, we'll get to all the Dr. Seuss examples, right? The sukkah on a camel, the sukkah on a ship, right? So this is already, the circus is beginning. So sukkah agave sukkah. Tana Rabbanan. So first of all, where do I know that a sukkah under a sukkah is an issue? But so it's actually, interestingly, it's actually inferred from the psukim. It says basukos teshvu below basukah shetachas a sukkah. Sorry. Turn around. Basukos teshvu below basukah shetachas a sukkah. Below basukah shetachas a ilan. So we see from Basukos Teshu, you should be sitting in a sukkah, not a sukkah under a sukkah, not a sukkah under a tree, and not a sukkah within a house. So the Gemara says, wait a minute, Adarabba, Basukos. It says Basukos in plural. So Tarti Mashma, that would imply that actually maybe you dafka should have two sukkahs, one on top of the other. So Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak Basukos Ksiv. Remember, we talked about Aim LaMikra or Aim LaMasoras. Do we look at the way it's written or the way it's pronounced? So we're looking at the way it's written without the vav, and therefore we see you're supposed to have singular, just one sukkah. Okay, very good. Now, this is going to be fun. We're going to do a few permutations right now. Amrav Yirmiyah. Hamim sheshtem kisheros, sticking with our case of one sukkah on top of another sukkah. There are times that both the top and bottom sukkah will be kosher. Hamim sheshtem psulos, there'll be times that both of them will be pasul. Hamim shetachtonik sheira vel yona psula, there'll be times that the bottom is kosher and the top is not. Hamim shetachtonik psula vel yona kshera, and there are times that the bottom sukkah is pasul, but the top one is kosher. So, what are these four different permutations? So let's go through how we can have all of these. When could, how could both of them be kosher? Seems to be, I thought it was a zero-sum game. So hey, dummy, you go so it's when the roof, which I guess is the floor of the upper sukkah, right? The roof of the top sukkah is basically the floor of the upper sukkah, and basically it's apparently a very flimsy floor, so the people on top should probably be careful. But because the bottom sukkah skach is mostly it's not providing enough shade, it's mostly open. So essentially, it's benefiting. Where's the shade really coming from? From the upper sukkah schach. And the upper sukkah schach is within 20 amos. It's not that tall. So in that way, it's basically one big sukkah at that point, and the entire one big sukkah is going to be kosher. Next case, pamim sheshteim psulos. When can both of them be invalid? Heichi dami. You're going to travayat silusum meruba chamasan in a case in which both pairs of skach provide more shade than sunlight. Ukaima elyona lemal me'eser mama. The top one is above 20 amos. So the issue is that the bottom one is the top one has all the shade, right? And the issue is that the top one is above 20 amos. So basically the bottom one is not going to be kosher, and the top one's not going to be kosher either because it's above 20 amos. So now both of them are problematic. Then number 3, there are times that the bottom will be kosher and the top will be pasul. Hechi dami kagon on Yonam and Aleph shetachtona tzilusa meruba mechamasa v'yona chamasa meruba mitzilasa ukaimi travaya b'soch esrim. So where the bottom has mostly shade and the top one has mostly sunlight and is within 20. So in a case like that, the bottom one, which has legitimate schach, will be kosher. And the top one, which schach, it doesn't have tzilus mechamasa, which doesn't have majority shade, will be pasul. And then finally, upavim shel yona kisheira v'tachtona psula. There's an instance in which the top one will be kosher and the bottom one will be pasul. So when is that? When's the top of kosher, one's pasul? Echidami, go into Travat, that's Mirchamasan, Ukaima El Yona Bisoch Esrim. So when the top one is, so Pam Shal Yog Shera, right? So when is it going to be? So when the top one has good schach and one second. I may have lost I jumbled up over here. Let me just reread that. So when is the top going to be kosher and the bottom one pasul? So the top schach is kosher, majority shade, within 20, and the bottom one is going to be pasul because it too has its silasa meruba mechamasan. So it's not getting its shade from the top schach, it's getting from the bottom one, and the bottom one is a sukkah tachas sukkah, which is pasul. Okay? So the Gemara asks, Pshita, what's the chiddush from all this, right? Why do I need to spell this all out? We already know the general rules. What was the chiddush of teaching us this? So the chiddush is tachtona kishera v'yona psula itzrichalei. The chiddush is to teach us this case in which the bottom will be kosher and the top will be pasul. Ma'adatema nigzor dilma mitztar schach pasul badi schach kosher kamash malan. So what's the concern? This is bringing both sugis together. So the chiddush is that you have a case in which the bottom sukkah will be kosher, but the top will be pasul. Now, and the bottom one will still be a legitimate sukkah. Why? So what's the concern? The concern is you might think that, well, if I can have a sukkah under a sukkah that is kosher, even though there is another set of schach suspended over it that's not kosher, you might come to extrapolate that, I could also place a sukkah under a tree with leaves suspended over my schach, and it would still be kosher. But that's not right. That's incorrect. You would have a pasul sukkah. So there's a havamina to think that the rabbis would have said, we're concerned you're going to mix them up, and you're going to say the same way you could put a sukkah under a sukkah with flimsy schach, you could also put a sukkah under a tree's branches. But the chiddush is the rabbis did not go that far. They did not expand. They did not make a gezerah, and they said that in a case in which the top schach is pasul, you can still have a kosher sukkah under it. I'll just Rashi says the el yona lemala me esrim af tachtona psula mishum demistar schach pasul badi kosher. Right. So okay, very good. All right, so that brings us to the end of our Gemara over here. Now, any questions before we get back to our question on Rashi that we left off with? Anything we can clarify? Okay. So, just to remind ourselves, what was our issue with Rashi? Our issue with Rashi was as follows. Rashi says that, remember we said, so if you build a sukkah under a tree, then we have a big issue because the tree is going to pasul the schach that's under it. So, or at least it won't combine with the schach that's under it. And Rashi said the solution of the Gemara is mix a minority of non-kosher schach that's attached to the tree together with the majority of the kosher schach, and then together they'll push over the 51% mark in order to provide a majority of shade for the sukkah, thereby validating the sukkah. And how is this operating? Through the principle of bittul barov. And we said that it seems to be an issue because how is it operating under bittul barov? You're not allowed to deliberately be mevatel something. And also, what was our second issue? Was that it's efshar levarer. You can figure out what's attached to the tree and what's not if you look closely enough. So that's not called a real case of bittul if you don't actually have a suffix. So what does Rav Elyashiv say? Rav Elyashiv, I'm not going to say it's convoluted because it's probably just a chesaron, a lack of my own understanding of Rav Elyashiv. Rav Elyashiv says this is not operating under bittul baro, but a similar concept which comes up in the laws of mechitzas on Shabbos. And actually relevant, we discussed regarding sukkah as well, that there's an idea of having omei meruba al haparetz, that when you're building an enclosure, that you want omei meruba al haparetz, you want a majority of it enclosed. If you don't have a majority enclosed, you have too many gaps, you have parts meruba al omei, then you don't have a kosher enclosure. So he's basically is trying to explain that it's operating under a similar principle like in dini mechitzos. The issue he notes is that in a case of paras meruba al omei, where you have fencing and you have a gap, and then you have more fencing, I believe it has to be less than 10 amos between each within each gap. So the issue there is that you actually have defined fencing, defined gap space, defined fencing, etc., etc. Here, though, you're mixing them together. So he says that's why you need a majority of kosher schach in order so that it's still considered nikar and it's still considered significant, so it can be mevatel. Okay. Again, maybe it's a lack of my own understanding of Elyashiv. He basically, and I think others try to do this as well, they try to finagle with Rashi a little bit and say, he doesn't really mean a rove like in bittul barov, he means a different kind of rove. And if I remember correctly, toward the beginning of the Masechta, Rashi made a similar kind of statement about rove as well. He keeps bringing rove back to schach, and we had a question there too. Oh, you know what the issue was? At the beginning of the Masechta, Rashi was talking about rove in terms of the shade being mevatel, the light or the light being mevatel, the shade. It's like how do you do bittul barov with light and shade? What's even going on over there? So we had a similar issue with Rashi earlier in the Masechta, if I recall correctly. The final thing I want to share with you is from Soloveitchik. I realize I have the blur mode for the background, so you don't see it. I have to say, okay, it's not working. Basically, you'll trust me, it's for Soloveitchik. Rishimo Shirim. Soloveitchik says he connects this to, he actually goes ahead with the whole, he goes full in. This is bittul barov. This is operating off the principle of bittul barov, the same way it operates in kashrus. So what's going on over here? So again, I know some of the 630 or Pnei Halacha folks, you'll appreciate this. Basically, let's say I have 3 pieces of meat. 2 pieces are kosher, 1 piece is treif. And they get mixed together and I can't tell what's what. So because it's min b'mina, right? They're the same kind of thing. They're both they're all 3 pieces of beef. They're all pretty much the same thing. And it's yavesh b'yavesh. So in a case like that, so the question is, what do we do? So bittul barov applies. But what do we mean when we say bittul barov applies? So it's a machlokes, the Rashba, and of course many others weigh in on this. According to the Rashba, you basically, when you can eat all 3 pieces of meat, but you can't eat all 3 pieces of meat bevas achas at the same time, because there is a non-kosher piece of meat there. There is some treif meat. It's just that you don't know which one's a treif meat. So basically, each time you eat another piece of meat, we view it within a vacuum, and we say, chances are you're eating the kosher piece of meat. Even though eventually you are going to eat all 3 pieces of that meat, all 3 pieces of meat, each time you eat another piece of meat, we are looking at it within a vacuum, and we're saying majority chance is that you're eating kosher meat, even though you're going to eat the non-kosher piece of meat. So the Rush, however, this is, I think, the most radical shita in terms of being makel in the sugya, says, no, actually, if you want to stuff your face, you can eat all 3 pieces of meat at the same time. Why? Because when that piece of meat falls in with the other piece of meat, the magic of bittul barov is that it assimilates that piece of meat and it transfigurates it into one of its own kind, right? It's like the Borg, right? So it gets, any Trekkies? Okay. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So it's right. I think that's probably where I got the word from. It assimilates them, and now the meat becomes part of the kosher meat collective, but for good reasons. So you can actually eat all 3 pieces of meat at the same time, because now you actually have 3 kosher pieces of meat. So Rav Soloveitchik says, Yotze Yevasher Rashi Shalfanina Misparish Dafka Api Shitas Harash Lo Api Shitas Harashba. So Rav Soloveitchik, just an interesting understanding of Rashi. He says it would seem that Rashi is adopting the Rush's school of thought in Bittul Barov. It's not just that you have kosher schach and then we ignore the presence of the non-kosher schach or whatever, but no, it actually assimilates the non-kosher schach into the kosher schach, and that way you're able to validate your sukkah, you're able to be mamshir your sukkah, because now you have transfigurated, you've changed the status of non-kosher schach into kosher schach by being mevatalet. So I just really love how Rav Soloveitchik connected those 2 sugyos, and he really leans into that idea.
But Rabbi, how does that get around a mevatli Yisrael Lechatchila?
Yeah, it's a good question. So that's Henry there, right?
Yes.
Okay, good to hear you, Henry. So
yes,
it's a great question. Henry's asking, but still, why then am I allowed to mix them together in the first place? So you're right, Sarich Beer, we do need an explanation. Again, I'm just shooting this one out there as pure speculation that maybe because we're not talking about Isser over here. But again, if it's not Isser, then how much can we be comparing these laws then to like in Katras? But maybe it's because Imaval and Isser Lechachil, there's no Isser, there's nothing prohibited here. There's just something that's puzzle. Puzzle is not like Isser V'Heter. So maybe. But you're correct. We would need an explanation for that. Maybe Rav Soloveitchik does explain that somewhere, but I don't think I saw him in this piece to explain that. All right, very good point. Just another example. It's always beautiful to see how all sorts of areas of Torah can connect. It's all one big interconnected, beautiful tapestry of a system of halacha. So you know that whenever, like, in classes at YU or elsewhere, when we connect like the Torah and what we're learning in the afternoon in a sector, so like, a Torah Umada moment, all the things come together. So I don't have a Torah Umada moment, but I have a Torah Utorah moment for all of you. Look at how the Torah all comes together. So hopefully we can appreciate that. All right, shkayach everyone, good learning together. And God willing, we'll pick it up on Yud Amud Av. I feel like this is even though we start on Beis Amud Av, but I feel like this is a milestone that we're on 10A right now. So we should feel good about that. Shkoyach, and God willing, we'll pick it up next week. Good Shabbos, everyone.
Thank you.